Picture this. You're pumping gas on an ordinary October morning. The sun is shining, coffee in your hand. You have no idea that at this very moment, crosshairs are centered on your back. You don't hear the shot. You don't see it coming. 1 second you're alive, thinking about your grocery list, your kid's soccer game, what you'll make for dinner. And the next second, you're gone. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe and like to be part of our growing community. For 3 weeks in October 2002, this nightmare wasn't hypothetical. It was reality. And the man behind the trigger? He wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was driving down the highway in broad daylight, in a blue Chevrolet Caprice that looked like every other car on the road. A rolling coffin, a mobile execution chamber. This is the story of John Allen Muhammad, a decorated war veteran, a father, a man who once swore to protect and serve, who became one of America's most terrifying domestic terrorists. And the question that haunts us still, how does a soldier become a monster? December 31st, 1960. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. A baby boy enters the world on New Year's Eve, John Allen Williams. It should have been a celebration. Instead, it was the beginning of a tragedy that would take 49 years to fully unfold. Before he was a killer, John was a victim. At just 3 years old, his mother died of breast cancer. Can you imagine? 3 years old. Still learning to tie your shoes, still afraid of the dark, and suddenly the one person who makes you feel safe is gone forever. And then, as if that wasn't enough, his father, the man who should have held him through the grief, abandoned him. John was raised by his grandfather and an aunt. They did their best, but how do you fill a hole that size? How do you explain to a child why everyone leaves? At 17, John found something that promised to fill that void, the military. In August 1978, he enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard. Finally, structure, purpose, a place to belong. He transferred to the regular army in 1985, trained as a mechanic, a truck driver, a metal worker. But more importantly, he learned to shoot, and he was good at it, better than good. He earned the Expert Rifleman's Badge, the Army's highest level of marksmanship. 36 out of 40 targets, distances ranging from 75 to 300 meters, precision, control, power. In 1991, Sergeant John Allen Williams deployed to the Gulf War, where he dismantled Iraqi chemical warfare rockets. He came home decorated, the Southwest Asia Service Medal, 2 Kuwait Liberation Medals. He was honorable, he was a hero. But something came back with him from that desert. Something dark. His second wife, Mildred, watched the transformation with horror. The man who left for war, happy, focused, loving, came back angry, confused, depressed. The John she married was gone, replaced by someone she didn't recognize, someone who frightened her so much that she sought a restraining order, alleging abuse. In 1987, John had joined the Nation of Islam, changing his name to John Allen Muhammad in October 2001. He helped provide security for the Million Man March in 1995. He was searching for meaning, for identity, for something to explain the rage burning inside him. When his marriage to Mildred crumbled, when she tried to take his children away, something inside John Muhammad snapped completely. In 1999, he did the unthinkable. He kidnapped his own 3 children and fled to Antigua, engaging in credit card fraud and forging immigration documents. The man who once served his country was now a fugitive, a criminal, a father who had stolen his own flesh and blood. But John Muhammad wasn't done collecting victims. In Antigua, John Muhammad met a woman named Una Sion James and her 14-year-old son, Lee Boyd Malvo. And this is where our story turns from tragic to truly terrifying. Imagine being 14, vulnerable, fatherless, desperate to belong. Now imagine a decorated soldier, a man who speaks with authority and confidence, taking an interest in you. offering to be the father you never had. Lee Malvo didn't stand a chance. Una left her son with Muhammad, planning to bring him to the United States later. It was the worst decision she would ever make. Muhammad converted Malvo to Islam in March 2001, then systematically isolated him from his mother. He controlled what Malvo ate, forced him to exercise obsessively, and taught him how to shoot. In 2012, Malvo revealed something even darker. Muhammad had sexually abused him, beginning when he was just 14 years old. This wasn't mentorship. This wasn't fatherhood. This was grooming, manipulation, the methodical destruction of a child's soul. Muhammad indoctrinated Malvo with a twisted vision. They would establish a camp in Canada where homeless children would be trained as terrorists. Young black boys would be taught weapons and stealth, then sent across America to carry out coordinated mass shootings. Muhammad wanted to send the nation into chaos, building on the fear that already gripped the country after September 11th. Authorities later claimed Muhammad admitted he admired Osama bin Laden and approved of the 9/11 attacks. He wasn't just a killer, he was a terrorist with a blueprint for nationwide carnage. But first, there would be a test run. February 2002, the shooting begins. Between February and September, Muhammad and Malvo moved across 10 states, killing 7 people. 7 families destroyed, 7 futures erased. And this was just the rehearsal. Then they came to Washington, D.C., October 2002. For 23 days, the nation's capital became a war zone. Muhammad and Malvo had modified a blue Chevrolet Caprice, cutting a hole in the trunk near the license plate. The car itself became a weapon, a rolling sniper's nest. They could park anywhere, look like everyone else, and fire from inside the vehicle. Invisible, untraceable. October 3rd, James Martin, a 55-year-old program analyst, shot dead in a grocery store parking lot. October 3rd, James Buchanan, a 39-year-old landscaper, killed while mowing grass. October 3rd, Prem Kumar Walekar, a taxi driver, shot at a gas station. October 3rd, Sarah Ramos, a 34-year-old babysitter, killed while sitting on a bench. October 3rd, Lori Ann Lewis Rivera, shot while vacuuming her van at a gas station. 6 people. One day. The killings continued. Dean Harold Myers, an engineer, shot at a gas station. Pascal Charlotte, a carpenter, killed while standing on a street. Iran Brown, a 13-year-old boy, shot outside his school. He survived, but his childhood didn't. The entire region lived in terror. People zigzagged when they walked. Parents shielded their children's bodies with their own at gas stations. Schools went into lockdown. Nobody felt safe, because Muhammad and Malvo were everywhere and nowhere. They could be anyone. In total, 17 people dead, 10 wounded, in just 10 months. But Muhammad made a mistake. In his arrogance, he left a note at one of the crime scenes, directing police to investigate a liquor store robbery murder in Montgomery, Alabama. At that scene, someone had dropped a magazine, a gun magazine, with fingerprints. Those prints belonged to Lee Boyd Malvo. The net was closing. Investigators traced Muhammad, discovering he'd purchased a blue Chevrolet Caprice in New Jersey on September 11, 2002, exactly 1 year after the terrorist attacks he so admired. On October 24, 2002, a lookout broadcast went nationwide. At an Interstate 70 rest stop in Myersville, Maryland, police spotted the Caprice. Muhammad and Malvo were inside, sleeping. The nightmare was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. Muhammad's trial began in October 2003 for the murder of Dean Harold Myers. The prosecution argued the entire spree was designed to mask the murder of his ex-wife Mildred, allowing him to regain custody of his children. The judge ruled there was insufficient evidence for that theory, but the evidence of his crimes was overwhelming. November 17, 2000, and 3. John Allen Muhammad was convicted on all 4 counts: capital murder, terrorism, conspiracy, and illegal use of a firearm. The jury unanimously recommended death. In Maryland, he was convicted of 6 more murders and sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms. The appeals ran out. The stays of execution were denied. November 10, 2009, Greensville Correctional Center, Virginia. 48-year-old John Allen Muhammad woke up knowing it was his last day on earth. 6 years, 11 months, and 21 days after his arrest. The sun rose on a man who would never see it set. In the strange ritual of American justice, condemned prisoners are offered a final meal, a last taste of humanity before the state takes their life. It's meant to be a gesture of dignity, perhaps a remnant of ancient customs, or maybe just a way for us to feel less barbaric about what we're about to do. Muhammad was asked what he wanted. He declined a special meal. Think about that for a moment. This man, who had spent months planning murders, who had calculated trajectories and chosen victims, who had methodically modified a car into a killing machine, when offered one final choice, one last moment of personal desire, he said no. Instead, he ate the standard prison fare, the same institutional food he'd been eating for years. No favorite childhood dish, no comfort food, no taste of freedom. Nothing. Was it defiance, pride, indifference? Or had he become so disconnected from his own humanity that even the simple act of choosing a meal felt meaningless? Throughout the day, Muhammad met with his legal team for the final time. The lawyers who had fought for years to keep him alive, knowing finally that they had lost. What do you say in those moments? What words could possibly matter? He was offered the chance to see visitors, to make phone calls, to write final letters. The records show he remained largely silent, stoic, detached, the same way he'd been throughout his trial, as if he'd already left this world in spirit, even as his body remained. As evening approached, prison officials began their preparations. The execution chamber was readied. Witnesses gathered, family members of the victims, reporters, prison staff. Can you imagine being in that witness room? Looking through that glass at someone strapped to a gurney, knowing you're about to watch the precise moment life becomes death. Some came seeking closure. Others came for justice. Some came because they couldn't not come. Muhammad was moved to a holding cell adjacent to the execution chamber. He was given the opportunity to shower, to put on fresh clothes. Guards monitored him constantly, not because they feared he would try to escape, but because condemned prisoners sometimes try to cheat the executioner, to take their own lives rather than give the state the satisfaction. But Muhammad remained calm. Eerily calm. At 9 p.m., the warden came to escort him the final steps to the execution chamber, just a few feet. He was strapped to the gurney with leather restraints. IVs were inserted into his arms, the lines running to machines hidden behind a wall where executioners waited, their identities protected, their hands about to deliver death. The warden asked the question required by protocol, "Do you have any last words?" This was it, the final moment, the last chance to apologize, to explain, to express remorse, to acknowledge the 17 lives he'd taken, the families he'd destroyed, the terror he'd inflicted on an entire region. The last opportunity to be human. Muhammad stared at the ceiling. His expression was blank, empty. He didn't move, he didn't speak, not a single word. Silence. The most deafening sound in that chamber. The warden gave the signal. Behind the wall, unseen hands pushed the plungers. 3 chemicals began flowing through those IV lines into Muhammad's veins. First, sodium thiopental, the anesthetic, meant to render him unconscious, then pancuronium bromide, paralyzing his muscles, stopping his breathing, finally potassium chloride, stopping his heart. At 9:11 p.m., the prison doctor confirmed what everyone already knew: John Allen Muhammad was dead. Outside the prison, victims' families stood in the November cold. Some cried. Some felt relief. Some felt nothing had changed. Their loved ones were still gone, and this death didn't bring them back. Lee Boyd Malvo, the boy he'd groomed and destroyed, remained in prison, serving multiple life sentences, hearing the news that the monster who'd shaped him was gone. But 17 graves remained filled, 10 wounded victims still carried their scars, and an entire region remembered what it felt like to be hunted in broad daylight. At 9:11 p.m. on November 10, 2009, John Allen Muhammad's heart stopped, but the questions he left behind continued to beat in all of us. How does a protector become a predator? How does trauma turn into terrorism, and how do we stop it from happening again? John Allen Muhammad's story isn't just about one man's descent into evil. It's about how trauma can metastasize into violence. And it's about 17 families who lost someone they loved to a man who decided his pain mattered more than their lives. The blue Chevrolet Caprice is gone. The headlines have faded. But the questions remain. How do we spot the warning signs? How do we stop the cycle? How do we protect the vulnerable from those who would exploit their wounds? John Allen Muhammad proved that evil doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it drives a regular car. Sometimes it looks exactly like everyone else. Until it's too late.